the impact of government intervention versus SME outcomes. And the third one, on why access to finance is a challenge for agribusinesses, especially women and youth-led in Ghana. That will take us to 3 o'clock. So at this point, I welcome you back from your networking break. And I'm going to announce our panel, Women at the Center of Growth, Turning Gender Finance to Economic Power in Ghana. It's supported by the Ghana Investment Support Program. And our moderator is Tony Anderson, Project Manager, Ghana Investment Support Program. Our speakers are Mirabel Moreau, Team Lead, Ghana Investment Support Program. Natalie Gog Ebo, Partner, Open Capital Advisors. Catherine Krobodese, CEO, Eden Tree. Frida Donko, Founder and CEO, FH Depot, and Barbara Gansa, CEO, Zinari Capital Limited. Can we have our speakers make their way to the stage? And our moderator, Mr. Anderson, right at the end on his throne. So that's it. Please check your microphones to make sure they are working. And Mirabel, Natalie, Catherine, Frida, and Barbara. It's an all-female panel. Well, he's the moderator. And Tony. All female plus Tony. I like that. Yes. These are your seats. Just please take control of your microphones. Make sure they are working. And we are good to go. Enough space. Thank you.
Hello, everybody.
Yes. Thank you so much, Tony.
Shall we please have our seats, please? I see some guys at the door.
Hello.
If we could get seated. We have a very, very interesting panel today. Okay. All conversations, please, after. We'd like you guys to follow quite closely to this very interesting discussion. So it'll be good to have your attention. And if everyone else could remain seated, that would be amazing. Thank you. Good afternoon again to everybody. My name is Tony Anderson. I'm the project manager for Ghana Investment Support Program. And I'll be moderating today's panel. Before we dive into this very important topic, I would like to give some intro. And then right after, I would introduce our panelists, our very able panelists. Women at the center of growth. Now, this conversation is quite important in today's discussion, more primarily because it's no longer about the intent of it. Over the past year alone, we've seen some strong momentum from new public commitments and blended finance initiatives to innovations from financial institutions that we just heard, to the proposed Women's Development Bank and the ecosystem platforms that are actively strengthening pipeline and support systems. So in many ways, the question is no longer whether we should invest in women. It is how effectively we are actually doing it. And this brings us to this very paradox, which we're going to discuss today. We are living in a time where capital can move across continents in seconds, where technology can assess credit risk in real time, where we have more programs, like we just heard about Orange Corners, more funding vehicles, more targeted initiatives than ever. And yet, the average woman in Ghana will tell you that even though her business is profitable, she's struggling to access capital. So clearly the issue is not about effort. And it's not even about the availability of capital. It's something deeper. How we define value and how we instinctively trust with it. There's an African proverb to my rather long intro. Until the lion learns to write, every story will glorify the hunter. And in many ways, the financial system has been telling one version of the story about risk, about skill, about readiness, but not always from the perspective of the women who are actually building the businesses. It's not always from the people who are investing to create jobs. It's not always from the sustaining markets. So today we're not going to talk about unlocking more capital. We're going to be interrogating the system, whether what we've built is truly capable of recognizing and funding the full extent of that value. Because if women are at the center of growth, then the real question is, when does capital start behaving like it knows that? So to dive into this question, I'd like to introduce my very colorful panel, because women bring color to everything, including the panel, as you can see. I'm joined here by exceptional women who are leaders engaging and challenging this very phenomenon. To my immediate left is Catherine, the CEO of Eden Tree, 35 years in building and scaling a leading agribusiness in Ghana. I thought we'd get a clap for that. 35 years running. 29 years. I've given her more. I saw into the future and gave her more. We have Frida Donko, founder and CEO of FH Depot, driving innovation in logistics and supply chain space. Let's give a round of applause to Frida. We have our very able Barbara Ganser, CEO of Zinari Capital. If you want to know about investing in women, she's the one. Deploying capital into businesses across the ecosystem. A hand for Barbara. We have Natalie, partner at Open Capital Advisors. She's going to bring in the deep expertise in advisory and technical assistance across the African markets. Another hand for Natalie. And then the most colorful, Mirabel Moreau, currently the team lead for Ghana Investment Support Program, working at the intersection of capital and market development. Let's give her a round of applause. Okay, now I see everyone is settled. We had a long break over the weekend, and I know two things actually happen when there's a break. You either have a fresh mind to start or you forget your email password. I hope it's the former. To dive in, we'll speak to the entrepreneurs. So Frida and Catherine, this question actually goes out to you. Access to capital, people may say, is like how a Ghanaian security man would help you to park. They'll keep telling you, brah, come. They never tell you when you're actually there. There's always investors coming to you with an EOI, and then they'll tell you, wait, we think you're not yet ready. And there are so many things in between, so many bloodlines. So we know that capital is actually very painful sometimes and slow. And I want to understand from the entrepreneur's perspective, what are the hidden hurdles that you've been facing? And how do you find it when trying to secure funding as a women-led business? So we'll start with Frida, then we'll speak, then Catherine will take on.
Okay, so from my experience, I don't think that there's a problem with funding. There are huge possibilities and quite a number of options available. The problem is the way it is structured. It is structured to sort of stifle you. There's too much pressure surrounding how the structure is. I'll firstly touch on collateral. So for a lot of venture capitals or even the mainstream funding, you are required to raise about 75% to about 100% in collateral. That puts a lot of SMBs at a very high disadvantage because for most people, they would not be able to raise this kind of capital. But believe you me, there's a lot of untapped, huge potential in the women-led business. Women are high performers. We have to just basically make this about the performance, the numbers, and then if the person can deliver. It's as simple as that. If we restrict it to just collateral based, collateral, yes, there's a high chance that, yes, when there's a default, you can just sell it off. But there's a lot of beauty in growth, growing something from start to finish. So I believe that a lot more of these funding houses should make it about performance, the numbers, and then the market accessibility. Interest rates, aside dealing with all the taxes that we're heddled with, because honestly, we all know in this room that the taxes in Ghana are not very favorable to the normal Ghanaian market, and especially women-owned businesses. That is mainly tailored in the logistics and then retail. Our margins are very slim, and these taxes are huge. So if the fund houses also comes with huge interest rates and all of that, and even for most of the women-led initiatives, we still have that. We still have that issue. I would cite an example. APSA is doing really awesome. I'm an ambassador for the APSA She business. Very awesome initiative. You get 1 million collateral free, up to 2 million collateral free. But sometimes the rates surrounding some of these things, and then especially after there's no growth plan, there's no growth structure around some of these women-led initiatives. So even though they are trying to resolve a lot of bottlenecks with collateral free and then interest rate and all of that, the space is too short. The span of growth is too short. 1 year, after 1 year, you revert back to the same hustle that we're trying to avoid. So I would advise that a lot more people should look at performance, look at moving from step A to step B to step C, and it would relieve a lot of businesses. Impactful finance as well is very key. I was listening to one of the last speakers, Nanaya. She was mentioning some numbers, 5,000, 25,000. These are not impactful numbers. Women have high potentials. We are bold. There has to be certain bold financial models that is friendly, that is easy, that will propel the growth that we have. Because women are strong, we're fearless, and yet still we take into account, we're cautious as well. So I don't know what it would take for the funding houses to realize that the future is us.
Right.
If you bank on us, I don't know where the failure lies.
Yes.
So please just take a chance on
Maybe
it.
just
We
to
will
chip in here.
deliver.
Yes. As you can see, she's very passionate. You didn't get that in the previous panel. We brought you the best. So I hope you're all taking notes. So Catherine, let me come to you. I'm sure you share the same sentiments as Frida. You are also an entrepreneur. You've tried to raise capital. You've successfully raised. Have you ever walked away from a funding conversation and thought, oh, okay, this actually sounds helpful, but I don't think there's going to be any funding close for me here. It seems supportive, but they are missing out on something that is very particular for me. And if you can speak to it.
Okay, thank you. I would like to share 4 points because with me, I wouldn't say funding was difficult to come by, but it's the process, okay? So I'll share 4 points, and this is a small window to my journey. And this is true, it actually happened. I didn't get this from AI, okay? So the process takes too long, even though Eden Tree is recognized as a business that has been around for a long time, which is 29 years. Trying to get a second round of funding to exit a current investor who has been with us for 10 years, which is INP, is taking a long time. Investors should move away from being overcautious and take reasonable risks to help scale up SMEs. Our first round helped us grow from 3 staff, we're at 75. Our first round,
I thought we'll get a clap for that.
yeah,
From 3 to 75.
from 3 to 75. And we now need a second round to scale up again. I even got tired of always pitching to different investors. Thankfully, with Pangea Africa's advisory service, we are close to a deal. Second point, with our first round of funding, which happened in 2015, TA was provided, and that made a big difference to us. We need the fund to scale up the business, and we also need TA to take care of the weak areas to provide a good foundation to enable growth. We used TA to fix our accounts department by engaging a good retired accountant who helped us seal the leakages in the company, especially where informal purchases happen to be 90% of purchases. My first purchasing officer built a house long before I did.
Wow.
The TA helped us acquire the right software for management systems and reporting. TA helped us in organizing farmer groups to work with us. TA helped us with a fresh look by rebranding. I must confess that our investors were very generous with TA support. Also, 2 years ago, BII also provided us with TA support to expand into small corner shops on the outskirts of Accra, and that pushed our revenue up by 15 to 20% approximately. Now, this is what works. Now, the other two are the pain points. Pain points with the initial investment was extreme forex fluctuations. In 2015, the euro rate was 4-1, and supposing the rate had been stable and gone to 6-1, a turnover of 50 million Ghana cedis would equal $2.5 million. However, at today's rate, 12-1, it becomes $1.25 million. That is a big hit. 4, there should be a clear demarcated category between short-term and patient capital. Short-term capital is for trading, buy and sell. For industry and production, that requires patient capital, at least 7 to 10 years minimum. And this is what we need. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that was a very interesting point, hearing from the SMEs. And one thing that many of them actually did admit, and maybe to the other SMEs in here, they said funding is not the problem. It is how the funding is being done. And we had some issues on the macroeconomic issues that Catherine just raised. We also heard about the collateral requirements that seem quite stringent. And then also on the interest rates. Seeing that we've heard much clearly from the entrepreneurs, one thing that Catherine actually mentioned was the perceived risk that come with women SMEs. And I want to throw this to the fund managers and the investors in the room, but first we'll begin with those on the panel because they're on the hot seats. I'll throw this question to Barbara and then also to Mirabel if you'd want to chime in, but first to Barbara. Is the idea that women-led SMEs being riskier in investment, is it a myth or a reality? And how should the fund managers in the room here navigate that sort of assessment? Because one thing they are looking out for as an impact fund or as an investor is not just to make impact, but also to balance it with the financial performance and the structural constraints. So I'll leave that question with you, Barbara, then if Mirabel also wants to chip in.
All right. Thank you very much, Tony. Feels like in just a few days, this is the second time I'm having to answer this question. I will start from the point that, yes, there is risk involved in every type of investment. So as an investor, if you do not want to see risk, then you have no business doing the work of an investor. But are women-led businesses or women-owned businesses riskier than other businesses? Definitely no. So there's risk all around, but it is not just limited to women. And most of the risk also that we see or we perceive are actually because of certain structural challenges, constraints, bottlenecks that are rather within our ecosystem, are within the economy, but we unfortunately turn around and pin it on the entrepreneurs. And so unless we are able to work together as ecosystem builders, whether in the private sector, whether in government, or from whichever angle, to come together to design solutions that eliminate these bottlenecks, it's going to be difficult. Because what we are usually doing is that we are working around them.
Right.
But we need to actually be more innovative and come up with solutions that actually address these bottlenecks and constraints.
Can you mention a few of these bottlenecks? Because it seems it's either the women are the victims of these structural constraints, or some of these structural constraints are sort of targeted because of the perceived risk. So if you could sort of outline that, maybe some of the fund managers here, they'll be scratching their heads, some will be bending down, but they know exactly what we are talking about. So let's lay it out all on the table. Yeah.
So the first one is collateral, which both Catherine and Frida have alluded to.
Right.
It is quite common, and as part of our de-risking mechanisms for investment, you want to see some collateral so that just in case the project you are financing fails, there's still something you can fall on,
right,
to recover your investment. But the issue here is that we live in an economy where we usually want to see only certain types of assets as collateral, particularly landed properties. But in this country, land title is a big issue. So you can assess several number of, and this is not even just a women thing, but women tend to suffer more because of certain biases, which also make it difficult for them to even have access to land. You can, and most of the time, even where there's some property that is being offered as collateral, the land title is not perfected. And from a legal standpoint, it becomes difficult for you to accept such property. So we need solutions that can help us address the land title issue. But from the part of us investors, it may also require us to be a bit more flexible and open-minded in our definitions of what can be acceptable as collateral. And so where there is no land title, but the person or the business has had access to the property for several years, then you may want to look at it. We may also want to look at other aspects of the business that can still give us that assurance that this is a stable business, this is a resilient business, and can work, has the potential, and can put the funds to good use and return it. So even, and we are all familiar with the 3 C's of credit, the character of the entrepreneur. Sometimes it's even more important than having the collateral. Also being open to putting in the extra time, extra resources to get a deeper and understanding of how the business, for instance, the cash flow cycles.
That's the performance that Frida mentioned.
Exactly.
Yes.
So we need to structure solutions around the way the women actually build their businesses,
right,
and not the way we have always done things.
Right. So tailor-made financing. Right. Mirabel, maybe we could hear from you on this very topic. What are your 2 cents to this, having played both or worn both hats, institutional player and then also as a previous investor? Yes.
So I'll just add one more element to Barbara's submissions. So this is on finding other strategies to base the lending on or assessment of an SME that's led by a woman. So, and this again goes to Frida's point on performance. You can look at their cash, not just cash in the bank statements, but also in the Amomo statements to understand the size of the business. And when you have these kinds of data and go through it, then you can start with, your initial round of funding and keep growing that. So, Frida again mentioned that you hear about lending that's available, credit available to businesses, 5,000, 10,000. How big of a business are you going to be able to grow with that? But if you start, and as the business is scaling, based on the relationship, you grow it very, very quickly, then you'll get to the point where we are having more and more businesses that are crossing $500,000 equivalent or $1 million equivalent. And these are the businesses that now at that scale, they can create even more jobs that we need.
Thank you. Let me come back again to the investors because the SMEs have also shared. Gender Lens Fund, Barbara, you run Zenari Capital. We are told that gender lens funds usually like to operate in silos. Or because of the nature of some of these women businesses, the ticket sizes are rather smaller for some of these women businesses. How do you then, and this is to many of these investors in the room that would most likely want to invest in these women businesses, how do you then ensure that the capital actually reaches the women who need it most, rather than those who are the visible entrepreneurs, those who have the live TikToks and whatnots, and are just out there in the newspaper? And there are others who are also doing impactful work, like Catherine just mentioned, having done so much work for the past 29 years, and second round being so difficult. How then do you find these gems? Yes.
All right. So I would say, regardless of whether a fund is or an investor is gender lens or not, we have different ticket sizes or funds that are investing different ticket sizes. So first, it's not that generally gender lens funds are often small amounts, but it depends on the type of investor that you are talking to. And you have to make sure that your needs are actually a match for the type of funding that you are trying to raise. But back to how we can make sure that those who really need the money are getting it. We have to tailor or we need to put in extra effort when it comes to our deal sourcing strategies, so that instead of just identifying the more visible ones who are usually well established in the urban areas, we need to use, we all usually rely on familiar networks when we are trying to develop our pipeline. So it means using some of the less familiar pipeline sources, going down to maybe at the community level, getting out of, so most of us, for obvious reasons, maybe we are headquartered in the cities. But to identify more businesses and make sure we are actually being very inclusive, it means that we need to go out. So instead of also waiting for businesses or entrepreneurs to come to us because they need support, we also need to also make the effort to go out and find
active pipeline search.
Exactly, who are also doing well, but for certain reasons, they are not coming out, they are not telling their stories properly because nobody has been able to. We also need to foster partnerships with intermediaries and others who actually have the trust and the last mile reach. And then we can ride on them to reach.
So like Deal Source Africa, like the cluster associations, you need to be bringing these women businesses out more. I'd like to also state this. So if you scan behind your key card over here, you would see a code, or there will be a code that leads you to resources. So from BII, that's British International Investment, there is a gender toolkit that is online for some of the fund managers. If you're a transaction advisor here as well, that is, if you work with businesses to keep them investor ready, on there you would see the gender toolkit there. It's for a guidance on gender smart investing and gender smart approaches that we can use to build value for these businesses. So if you scan that code, look through the resources, you'd see the gender toolkit there. You could have a good look through, and it will probably help you, especially with these discussions that we've raised. Let me dive right into the referees in the room. I call them the middlemen. They're somewhere between the entrepreneurs who are trying to grow and then the investors who are also trying to deploy capital. So Natalie, this comes directly to you. Businesses need the money today. Today. They need the money. And they are told that they are not investor ready. You are an SME. A fund manager has approached you that they're interested in you. They've sent you an EOI. You also have approached a fund manager because you need the money now. And you are being told that you are not investor ready. But we know that businesses also don't operate in a waiting room. You can't just be sitting there and waiting for the money before you go ahead, but you need the money to run your business. So to you, who is an advisor who has been working with these SMEs, how are we building capacity? Or how are we handling that tension between improving the skills of these businesses and at the same time their immediate need for funding? So you are in the middle. You are helping them raise the money. They also want to be investor ready. They need those skills to get there. How do you manage that? How do you help with that balancing factor?
No, I think you're right. It is a tension, right? Because indeed, the business, you need the money, maybe you need working capital to get some things done. And at the same time, the investor has to make sure that if I give you that money, right, your business has absorbing capacity to use the money, you have processes, you have whatever it needs, right, so that money can deliver on the objectives of why they're giving you the money. So it's a tight tension to navigate. And I think it's, the way I look at it is that they work hand in hand and they have to be staged. In the previous panel, the entrepreneur, I think it was Naya Venture, she said something about getting capacity and TA support early to then be able to formalize her business, put some things in place. And by doing that, she was then able to get a little bit of money to get to that next stage, right? And I think Elizabeth also mentioned getting some capacity building at some point to hire an accountant, to then put some things in place. And that will allow another investor, right, to come in and say, okay, now I see you have all these processes, you have things, and I'm much more comfortable giving you that next tranche of capital. So I think we have to look at it that way. So it's not, okay, get fully investment ready and then I'll give you a bunch of money, but how do we stage it and get the capital plus the capacity building that the company needs to get them to that next stage, and then more capital, more support to then get to the next stage.
Okay, so from what I'm understanding, TA can be done simultaneously with the capital raise. So you can be preparing the business whilst also looking for money. So It's not a waiting room.
Absolutely.
Okay. But every fund manager also has their requirements as well for these SMEs. So how have you in particular, I'm sure you've worked with a number of SMEs, how have you in particular been able to, fix those? Because there will be some maybe you're working with a business like Catherine on governance, right? And you came to Barbara and Barbara said, I think what we actually need here is, some financial support. Both on both ends. How have you had an advice, and also to the other advisors in the room, have you been able to, balance for that? And how do we extend that to women SMEs as well? Yes.
Yeah, no, I think that's a challenge because TA costs money and there's unfortunately not as much funding available to that. And so when we're working with the business, we try to make sure that the TA that we're providing is tied to their investment needs, right? And that's the point I was trying to make, because to get them to that next stage of growth. So if you approach an investor and they're like, okay, this business looks good, we love it, but there's X, Y, and Z, right? So then the goal of the TA should be to prioritize those needs to help the business get over the line. So if some fund managers may have a TA pool, and they may be able to put some money to provide some pre-investment TA, or say, okay, we're going to invest in that business, but as part of the deal, we need them to be able to do X, Y, and Z. We also have, donors or programs like yours that could come in and pay for that TA, sometimes a subsidized rate for the business, because the business also is strapped for cash, right? So to pay for TA to get those gaps closed is not always easy for them to do. So it's a constant tension, and just trying to work with the business, work with the fund manager or other programs that are available to try and figure out how we can get the capital that is needed to fund the TA and address the gaps that the business needs.
Okay, let me throw this to Mirabel, and also Natalie, you could come in. What's one thing that women-led businesses consistently misunderstand about raising capital? You've heard the pain points of Catherine, you've heard the pain points of Frida. Are there any other misconceptions about capital raising that you think other people have?
So I don't think it's specific to gender. It's
Right.
not a women's issue. It's just an entrepreneur issue. So most people come to markets to raise money and they expect it to happen yesterday. But then each type of funding has a way it operates, whether it's equity or a bank, in terms of the documents that are required, the kind of diligence process they have to go through. So I would say, the good book says, ask and it shall be given, seek and you'll find. But there's a timing element. You actually have to come to market earlier than you need the money. And so by the time it's becoming more urgent, hopefully you'd have gone through the process. Just to also expand a little bit on Nathalie's point, there's different technical assistance facilities on the market. Some are more boilerplate. It's for when the business is earlier in its evolution. So they would just have modules, for instance, on bookkeeping, on governance, just very general modules. And those are good when you're early. But if you're getting bigger, then you need more tailored technical assistance for your stage of business. So at that point, you might not be going to an incubator or an accelerator. You'd be in a smaller program and they'll be addressing, the pain points you have. So that's when you should be really looking out for those kinds of programs to help you to your next step. So as I mentioned, you need to be out earlier than when you need the money. And this is not a gender problem. This is an entrepreneurial problem.
Okay, Natalie. So Natalie, then I think we have a question from Catherine.
Regarding the TA, can't, like maybe, for example, 10 investment funds come together and use their CSR to start a TA support? Not possible.
I think that's a question to everyone in the room and not just those on the panel.
Okay,
That is where the funds have a TA facility. Because sometimes the funds themselves are challenged. Ideally, especially when we are talking about gender lens investing, a fund should have a dedicated TA facility so that we can, as we structure the investments, the TA is incorporated in the whole investment structure. So it's more tailored and more suited to the particular enterprise. But in cases where the fund itself doesn't have its own TA, what it means is that you rely on third parties. And this is where sometimes, because if it's a third-party TA provider, depending on how they are also getting their support, they may have their own objectives and goals, which may not tie in with what the fund or the investor is trying to do with you.
So funds should also have a value addition approach to their funding. Sorry, Natalie, just 1 minute and then we would dive right in, or they have answered.
Oh, no, I wanted to go back to the question you asked Mirabelle and I about like common misconception. And I agree with Mirabelle. I don't think it's a gender thing. The timing is a good one. The second one I see is thinking that all money is the same. Right? And I think it's a very common misconception among entrepreneurs. And I say fundraising is like relationship, it's like dating, right? So it's like, what do you want? You're trying to find alignment based on what you're looking for, what you need. Not everybody is a good match for you. And so it's really important to think about it that way, because maybe given the size of your business or the use of funds at that time, you might need some equity or some debt. And so if you're going and talking to the wrong investor, that's not going to work, right? Or giving your size of business, maybe that investor, they're investing in certain sectors or certain geographies that don't align with yours. So I think it's a common misconception that we see.
So understand the capital that you need and go to the right investors. At this point, would sort of open it up for any questions that you have to for the women on the panel. Even myself, if you want to ask me where I got my suit from, you can ask me. But please, it's open to the panel, to everyone. If you have any questions, I think there's a question. The women SME.
So when you get the microphone, sorry, Tony, get the microphone, please stand for us so the cameras can capture you. Brief introduction, then make it brief. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. Michael Matthews, Dyson Energy. First, I just want to address something I heard earlier in regards to the age restriction on for women who are looking for investment. I personally think that should be done away with, because if you want to support women, support women. I don't know why age has to come into it. So whoever's involved in that, please, probably something to look into. Now, back to the question at hand. Now, what I find difficult to understand, and maybe somebody on the panel can clarify for me, why is it possible that some kid in Silicon Valley with an app or some juicing idea or some obscure idea that makes no sense can go into, go visit an investor, go see an investor and raise $1 million, 2 million, 10 million, 100 million. In the case of Juicero, I think they raised 118 million, spelled spectacularly, right? But then a Ghanaian woman with a business that's generating income, making money, goes in to see an investor and is struggling to get a match, as the lady on stage mentioned earlier. Is it simply that the risk appetite for the investors is so low that they're looking for basically a guarantee or sure banker or something whereby they can't make any mistakes whatsoever? Or that there's something else afoot whereby maybe the criteria that are being used to measure the businesses in Ghana are not quite right for us? For instance, with square holes and round pegs and all that. Do we need to maybe establish a specific criteria that works more for the Ghanaian market than use criteria that basically maybe set up in Europe or in America for the Ghanaian market? Thank you.
Okay. In other words, why aren't the women businesses getting the money they need, correct? Yeah.
Any other question? Okay, please, we can take the question. So I think the question there was the women businesses that are involved in the real sector are not getting the funding that they need. And the question there is the issue on risk appetite being low, or is there a constraint around tailoring funding for Ghanaian SMEs? We'll hear from Barbara, we'll hear from even the SMEs, what they actually think. Yep.
I think it's a combination of factors. Definitely, if you look at some decades ago compared to now, there's more capital available for women and other entrepreneurs to access. But the actual access, as Frida said when she started, is how to meet the criteria. And we need to understand that when we are doing gender lens funds or impact funds, we are not just creating another SME fund. It's a fund that has to be structured differently. Our processes, our tools, and systems have to be tailored in a way that suits the intended beneficiaries, or in a way that helps address the problems, the gaps that we are trying to close. And so it's more of tweaking our systems, our processes in a way that allow us to still get what we needed to see using the typical finance or investment models. Because the reason why investors request for some information, as annoying as that process sometimes might seem, is because we needed to be able to understand the business better. Because if we don't have a good and detailed understanding of the business, then we are not structuring the investments the wrong way, the right way. And so, as challenging as so for any any business that is looking to raise finance, the first step to take is to make sure that you understand what is typically required to go through a due diligence process.
Right.
And here the TA providers can be very helpful. Let them understand what is needed to go through a successful due diligence process and help them to prepare the necessary information packages. But we as investors also need to look at alternative ways of getting access to the same information or the information that we need to make certain decisions. So for instance, when we are supporting women, we realize that women in our ecosystem or even small businesses tend to be highly informal. So instead of insisting on audited financial statements, are there other ways that we can still get a sense of their revenue levels, their cost and expense levels? And Mirabel made a good point when she said, we can look at their cash flows, bank statements, Momo statements. So for us at Zinari right now, we put more reliance on bank statements than audited financial statements. Because a lot of the times when we break down the audited financial statements, the figures just don't add up. You realize immediately this was not done with the company's real data.
There was some engineering that went on.
Exactly.
Okay.
Because investors said they want audited financial statements.
Yes. So they just cook anything for you quickly.
But the bank statements, the Momo statements, even interviewing their customers gives you a real sense of what they can actually do.
Okay. Mirabel, maybe if you could.
Yes. So real quick, Tony. So to that question, investors look at the context within which a business is operating. And unfortunately, if you pick a small business in Ghana, on the continent, the enabling environment is not the best. The entrepreneurs are not just fighting, to operate their business, but they are fighting to survive. So when you look at policies, we have issues, power issues, water issues, and businesses are dying not because the entrepreneurs aren't brilliant or they are not really pushing, it's because the environment is fighting to kill your business. So this is a risk premium investors will place on the business. And that's why you pick a business in Silicon Valley, which is also early stage. You look at the context and they have a higher chance of making it than a business here. You pair that with the type of capital and the risk appetite of that capital. There's more capital available out west, which is willing to be risky, than that which is coming our way. The money coming our way, when we talked about pensions and unlocking pensions, my parents are pensioners. I don't want my parents' money going into a startup.
Right.
Do you understand? That's more burden on the rest of us to be able to carry the weight. So we also need to look at both sides of the equation. Is the profile of the capital we have in the context of the businesses. And that's why I would say TA programs that are more comprehensive. So for Ghana Investment Support Program, for instance, we're not just looking at direct TA into the businesses. We're looking at the ecosystem and helping the ecosystem, whether it comes to capacity building for pension trustees or it's policy regulation and advocacy. It's just you have to always look at helping the ecosystem as well as helping the businesses. And hopefully, once we pair that with the capital, we can unlock more for our
Okay.
ecosystem. It's not just a women's issue.
Well said. I see our angel mounting up the stage. We have just one question, if you can just give us 1 minute. This is the last question. One sentence from each panelist. If we fast forward 10 years, what is one thing you hope we will have completely stopped saying about women in finance? Because by then, it should have sounded outdated. So we'll start from Catherine all the way. Just one sentence.
Collateral.
Collateral,
Yes.
okay.
For me, it will be blended finance.
Blended finance. It would have been a thing of the
Debt,
past.
equity, and then grants.
Okay. Yes, Barbara.
Balancing the financial needs of the business with the need for business advisory support.
Okay, so no business advisory support.
Not necessarily no.
Or balancing it.
So balancing it. So
Natalie gave you a side eye.
aligned,
Yes, you almost killed her business. Yes, Natalie.
I'll say, why do we need to invest in gender?
Right.
We shouldn't say that.
Okay, and then Mirabel.
Big bets to support innovation and women investing.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you all for being a lovely audience. Thank you to our angel. I would like to thank the panelists as well for giving us the time. Thank you.